Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Max with BuzzTox here, and I'm back with a review for Game of Thrones Season 1, Episode 1. This episode is called Winter is Coming, and I personally feel like I have a connection to this episode because it actually aired on my birthday. So Game of Thrones and I literally share the same birthday, so that's an interesting fact. But just a heads up, this video is much more than a simple review. I am giving my thoughts on the episode, however, I'm going to be giving an in-depth analysis. I'm going to explore concepts and ideas that relate to the show as a whole and not just this specific episode. So let me issue a quick spoiler warning out there. I'm going to be covering everything from the whole series of Game of Thrones from Season 1 to Season 7, so you have been warned. But overall, I gotta say, a lot of shit happened in this episode. First of all, we meet the Starks, the Lannisters, the Targaryens, and the White Walkers. Jon Arryn ends up passing away, which results in Robert Baratheon going north to visit Ned Stark to ask him to be Hand of the King. And we get a lot of character development between characters, and we also get a huge twist that reveals that Lord Arryn was actually murdered by the Lannisters. And then it's followed up by Bran being pushed off the tower, so at this moment the Lannisters aren't looking so good. And personally, I feel like this episode is extremely well written. The White Walkers at the beginning of the episode was a great touch, because it was very smart for the show to introduce the magic and the overall threat of the entire show in the first scene. And this episode was simple. We followed three family houses: House Stark, House Lannister, and House Targaryen. And on top of that, this episode was great with character development. This episode really focuses in on Bran Stark, so we get to understand him as a character, as a little boy who has aspirations and dreams to become a soldier. And he's a very active young kid, but he unfortunately ends up getting pushed off the tower. And that sets the whole tone for the entire show. But with Jon Snow, we realize that he's separated from his family and he really admires his father, Ned Stark. We see that Daenerys is timid, ignorant in certain cases, and very non-authoritative from what role she takes later in the show. We see that Arya is a warrior, Sansa is a lady because she loves to sew and she wants to marry Joffrey. And we see that Ned Stark maintains to be a good man even after all of these unfortunate circumstances. But moving on to the analysis, first of all, we see the White Walkers. And we know that throughout the show, they're not going to be prevalent for a while. But I think it's interesting because the show starts with the White Walkers, and I believe the show is going to end with the White Walkers. It's this silent, looming threat throughout the whole show, and we're starting to see that become more prominent in Season 7. And we see traits with these White Walkers that we see throughout the show. We see a symbol that we know that they've left behind. We also see the White Walkers use strategy. One of the White Walkers beheads a man of the Night's Watch and throws the head to another member. He's throwing the head to him as a warning. And they let him live and run south to Winterfell. Because for some reason the Night King wants everyone in Westeros to know that they are coming. And it's such a weird time because the White Walkers haven't come south in so long. And now that he's finally coming south, why would he send a warning? The best thesis that I could possibly have is that an agreement between the people and the White Walkers have been broken, and they're sending a warning to the people of Westeros so they hopefully understand that that term has been broken, and it's almost a warning for them to fix what they have done wrong. And adding on to the fact that they implement strategy and they have symbols shows that the White Walkers are a lot more than just a weapon from the Children of the Forest. And it still hasn't been 100% confirmed that they're more than just a mindless machine, but hopefully we get that revealed in Season 8. But moving on to Winterfell, we explore a lot of different concepts. First of all is Jon's admiration for Ned Stark. And he continues to have a strong connection with Bran. On one occasion, when Bran is firing arrows, Jon looks at him and says that Father is watching.
Go on. Father's watching.
And in another instance, when Ned is about to behead the deserter from the Night's Watch, Jon tells Bran to not look away because Ned Stark will know if he does.
Don't look away.
King of the Andals in the first
Father will know if you do.
And I pulled a couple things from this. First of all, Jon respects Ned so much that he puts him on a pedestal. He feels like Ned sees everything and he wants to impress him. And Jon takes this respect and carries it through the whole show. And he bases himself on honor and integrity just like his father, Ned Stark.
I'm not going to swear an oath I can't uphold. Talk about my father if you want. Tell me that's the attitude that got him killed. But when enough people make false promises, words stop meaning anything. Then there are no more answers, only better and better lies. And lies won't help us in this fight.
And I also find this so ironic because Jon continuously reminds Bran that his father Ned is continuously watching him. However, this is totally going to turn and Bran is then going to become the person who watches. Bran's going to be the one to watch Ned Stark. Bran is going to be the one to watch Jon Snow. And I find that relationship so funny because Jon admires Ned so much, he then in Season 6 becomes Ned Stark. he becomes the King of the North. And then Bran becomes the eyes that watches down on him. But if you want to know further why I think Jon is Azor Ahai and what Bran's purpose is as the Three-Eyed Raven, check out my video called Bran's Purpose as the Three-Eyed Raven. But later in the episode, we see the Starks stumble across a stag and a wolf. And this is a foreshadow to later in the season when Robert Baratheon dies. And because of his death, it results in Ned Stark being betrayed and also be killed. And that is perfectly summed up in this imagery of the stag and the wolf. But then the whole show changes when the Starks find the direwolf pups. Ned is about to kill them, but Bran tells him to stop, and Jon backs up Bran again, showing that connection. And Jon is the one who actually convinces Ned to keep the pups, because there's 5 pups and there's 5 Stark children, they were meant to have them. And the connection between the wolves and the Stark children are huge. First of all, with Ghost, he's an outsider. He's the one white one. He's the runt of the litter. But the white on the outside totally represents what Jon is. Jon identifies as a Stark, his father's son. He admires Ned more than anybody. But then there's the red eyes. The eyes that he was just born with that he can't control. And the red eyes are the color of red, Targaryen. Jon is internally Targaryen and he's externally Stark. And Ghost is the perfect symbol for that. And what else is interesting is that Jon becomes a ghost when he is killed and then resurrected. So Jon, in a way, goes on a journey to become his direwolf. And then there's Grey Wind, Robb Stark's direwolf, and that really closely resembles him. They always said that words are wind, which means that they carry long ways, long distances. And I find it funny how Robb's is called Grey Wind. It's like uncertain. You don't know, it's not clear. And that was the demise of Robb Stark. He promised Walder Frey a marriage, but yet he couldn't uphold it, and he married someone else. And then there's Shaggy Dog, Rickon's puppy. Rickon ends up fleeing from Winterfell and going with Osha to the last hearth. He has to hide to survive, in a way becoming a shaggy dog. And Lady Sansa's dog is exactly what Sansa grows to become, after going through all of her hardships. Nymeria is named after a warrior queen from Dorne 1,000 years ago. And that's what Arya admired, and that is what she became when she joined the Faceless People and became an assassin. But then there's Summer, and Bran is an outlier in all of these examples. And it's an outlier because the name Summer doesn't exactly relate to Bran directly. It's just his overall mission. Bran, at the end of everything he's gone through, he wants to fight Winter and defeat the Night King to bring back Summer. And the death of his direwolf Summer is the death of Summer itself. And it's the true announcement that winter has come. And even in this episode with the Stark children, the way they acted really reflect where they end up later in the show. But once again, Bran is the exception. And it's purposely done like that. Bran is a climber, he's active. He wants to be a soldier, but then he ends up crashing down at the end of the episode. He falls out of that tower and it changes his whole identity, or what he wants to be. Jon throughout this whole episode admires Ned Stark so much that he keeps pushing his teachings onto Bran. And it's funny because Jon will eventually become him, the King of the North. Sansa wants to be a lady, and she becomes just that. We see that when she wants to marry Joffrey and go to King's Landing. We see Arya shooting bows, trying to be a soldier, sneaking off, and admiring the Hound, which I thought was a very cool nod to what happens in the future. And Rickon was just there, just like in the show, and Robb in this episode wasn't fleshed out as much. He was just overshadowed by Jon's narrative. But speaking of Jon, we move on to Lyanna's tomb. Robert Baratheon goes down in the tombs to visit Jon Snow's mother. We find out that he was extremely in love with her, and he ended up killing Rhaegar Targaryen, Jon's father. And we see in this scene that Ned is very upset. You can tell that he's thinking about Jon. And the words almost itch in his throat when he tells Robb that all the Targaryens are gone. And I find that so interesting because Jon Snow was the first person who made Ned Stark break his honor. And Ned went to extreme lengths to protect Jon, and I think that just shows his love for him and his love for his sister. He even kept the secret from his wife, Catelyn Stark. But after Robb is finished in the crypts, they end up celebrating. Jon is actually left outside because Catelyn Stark doesn't want Jon to be involved. We see Jon speak to Benjen, which just builds on their relationship that ends up coming to a close in Season 7. But then something even more significant happens. Tyrion comes out and gives Jon some vital advice that affects his whole character moving forward. And Tyrion, throughout this whole season that he's with Jon, he has given him so many vital pieces of information that have helped shape Jon to who he becomes. In this episode, we get one piece of advice.
Let me give you some advice, bastard. Never forget what you are. The rest of the world will not. Wear it like armor, and it can never be used to hurt you.
And we see Jon throughout the show accept his advice. He does realize that he's a bastard and he does accept who he is. Even when he becomes King of the North, he still doesn't refer to himself as a Stark. To him, he is still a Snow, and I think he becomes proud of that. But I think this advice that was given to Jon is truly going to be tested in Season 8. Because Jon actually doesn't know who he is. He's not a bastard, he's a legitimized Targaryen. And next season, everyone will know that Jon is the son of Rhaegar Targaryen. And we know that Jon doesn't want power. Power always finds Jon. And I think this quote from Tyrion applies to this exactly. The advice is never forget who you are. And I'm sure when Jon realizes he's a Targaryen, he's not going to associate himself with being a Targaryen. He's going to try and forget who he is, because to him, he's Ned Stark's son. But then Tyrion says the rest of the world will not forget who you are. And that's true. If everyone knows that Jon is a Targaryen, they will try and seat him on the throne if he's legitimate, and if he's kind, and if he has the appropriate qualities to be a leader. And I think this example, plus many more, is the reason why I think Jon is the prince that was promised. Jon's journey is of perspective. It's understanding both sides. And I think that is vital in the long night and surviving the long night. And if you want to know why I think that, check out my video on why Jon Snow is the prince that was promised. And finally, we see Daenerys. No huge revelations with her, but it was really interesting learning about her character. She's in such a different place than she is later in the show. Because here she's a victim, and because she has never been in authority or ever been in a leadership position, she is ignorant to the world around her. She's extremely abused by Viserys, but she doesn't know any better. And she does think that he is the rightful heir to the throne. And she does think that he is the right person for it. So I'm really excited to see her character transformation and see all of that change. And we're going to see big changes because Illyrio was talking to Viserys saying that the people of Westeros drink secret toasts to his health. And after Daenerys' huge learning curve throughout the show, we realize that she feels very differently.
Even before your arrival, they plotted against her. Now,
they cry out for their true queen. They drink secret toasts to my health. People used to tell my brother that sort of thing, and he was stupid enough to believe them.
We also get the introduction of Jorah, and during this time he's actually spying on her and delivering secrets to Westeros. She ends up getting her dragon eggs, which I find very interesting on how she got them. I find it funny that Illyrio actually gave the dragon eggs to her and not to Viserys, because they are very valuable. But that being said, everyone thinks that magic has been gone from the world and that the eggs have been turned to stone. But those eggs end up being the key to who Daenerys becomes, the mother of dragons. And that story arc starts in this episode when Khal Drogo takes her as his wife. And we see the abuse and we see Daenerys start to get hardened to the cruelness of this world. And that will push her to the point where she conquers everything. And that is Daenerys' overall story arc, I believe, is a story about conquering and making things better than you found them. But that is it, everybody, for me. Please let me know what you think in the comment section down below. I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions of the episode. But until next time, I'll see you guys later.